Um, so welcome, Dr. Sharma. Dr. Sharma is a consulting psychiatrist in Woodlands Hospital, also St. Joseph and Mercy Hospital in Georgetown, Guyana, and he's professor of behavioral science at the American University in Georgetown, Guyana. Dr. Sharma was professor and chair of behavioral science and a consultant to the Ross University School of Medicine. Before he returned to Guyana in 2019, he was a psychiatrist at Ross University Counseling and Health Service. He's also served as a consultant in PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, where he developed mental health plans for Caribbean countries, which I know that this conference is interacting with that. And he's been providing training and disaster management in the Caribbean and Central and South, both the Caribbean and in Central and South America. One of his passions is his commitment to public education in Guyana for improving knowledge about mental health, where in some areas of Guyana, there is a real need for mental health education, and also for using that dissemination to promote the wellness of the Guyanese people. His collaborators on this talk are Dr. Yasmin Burnett, who's an associate professor of clinical medicine at St. George University in Grenada. Dr. Yasmin Burnett is an associate professor of clinical medicine at St. George University in Grenada and a former chair of the health services at Ross University School of Medicine. She's a pediatrician trained at the University of the West Indies. Welcome, Dr. Burnett. Finally, we have Miss McMillan Cuffy, and she's a mental health counselor at the Mental Health Unit of Public Health Department in St. Kitts and in Nevis. Ms. Cuffy is a mental health counselor working at the Public Health Unit with the Nevis Island Administrator. She was previously employed also at Ross University School of Medicine and has a lot of experience with diverse populations and specializing in the areas of trauma, PTSD, and disaster psychology with a public health perspective. So we welcome all of you. Dr. Sharma, if your technology is working, you can start your talk. Thank you so much. We're so glad you joined us.
Thank you very much, Professor. Yeah, so, and thank you for the introduction, and good day, folks. It wouldn't be very long, but I must say that I'm glad for the opportunity to talk about something that troubles all of us in Guyana. And we had a study done at Ross University. I think Susan, I see one of our former students here. I saw some youngsters in the audience, but they left. I wish they were here because this talk is more relevant for our students, because as you know, among students, you can have about over 20-something percentage of them entertaining suicidal thoughts. We don't think about it because we tend to see them as looking happy. All right, so just quickly to review what we've been talking about over the past couple of days. Some of the statistics in Guyana are not very nice to see. And we want to really have more of a discussion than too much of a talk. So the presentation itself is very short. And in terms of the background to suicide, I think most people would know about the Durkheim's theories of suicide, which economic, altruistic, egoistic, and fatalistic. I think in Guyana, I wonder what you guys think. What do you think we have? Economic, sort of like a breakup in relationships and separation from the group. Altruistic, where people would commit suicide or, sort of being part of a group, like the Japanese used to form, fly their planes into the warships to destroy the warships. Altruistic, so soldiers will fall into that group. Then the egoistic, which is sort of self-centered, you're not thinking about others, more in terms of yourself. And then fatalistic, where they feel that they're too overwhelmed by factors that are so negative. People may be in a prison and feel they can't get out of it, that better to end your life, you know? So what do you think our pattern is in Guyana? Maybe more of the people tend to think more of themselves and now seeing the impact on their families, because families of course suffer tremendously when people end their lives. So I think we have more of a little bit of the egoistic model here, maybe somewhat of the economic model too, of the Dortham's theories. Um, So we've been talking about Guyana being a big problem area in the Americas. You know, Americas, as everybody knows, is among the lower regions of the world. But in the Americas, Guyana is ranked as #1, which is not nice to hear. Thankfully, we have dropped from the #1 in the world of all nations to less than that, coming down into #4 in 2011. So hopefully we can continue to make progress downward. And that was a slide sure if I can go back. That was covered in the regions of the world, and that was 2011 showing us #4. How do we get it thing on? Can you do a previous one? Yeah. So that was us in 2006. We're coming down, and I got some good news for us here, and we also have a slide looking at a bit of our demographics. I talked about the style or theories to suicide being the 4 theories of Durkheim. There are other theories, of course, but our pattern in Guyana is not in keeping with what we learned from the textbook. You know that older males tend to commit suicide more often. Here in Guyana, it's the younger males that are more common, and the pesticide use is very common. And we worry about the pesticides because of our nature's agriculture country and the accessibility. And as many of you would know, Guyana made a lot of effort in trying to control accessibility to pesticides. So while we're talking things that worry us, I think we also have to reflect on very positive things. That at one time the ministry had created safe cabinets for most households. And I think they put back in that program, which is a very good program, where you have these safety cabinets. I hope they put it back. Not as much. And it should be there in all households where there's farming, that youngsters don't have the ability to grab a poisonous substance. So I'm now happy again because we've got a group of young students coming in. I want to say special welcome to you. What school are you coming from? What school are you? Christchurch. So we welcome Christchurch. So we're talking about young people today. My talk is about medical students that I study. So here we have the Guyana situation. What is interesting is that Guyana has a similar ethnic profile to Trinidad, but we don't have a similar profile in terms of suicide. Trinidad was ranked in 2012 as #45. But if you compare Guyana to the other Caribbean countries, there's some Caribbean countries where suicide is almost non-existent. For example, in St. Kitts and Nevis, where I spent a year after Ross University had a crisis of a hurricane, we moved to St. Kitts for a year. Their suicide rate is very low. In actual fact, the people who commit suicide in St. Kitts and Nevis seem to be the persons who are from outside of St. Kitts, coming from Guyana. So they had 2 horrific suicides this year in Nevis, which is a small island of St. Kitts. And both suicides were Guyanese. Now, you know, something is not right with our Guyanese people. It's the same profile we have in Trinidad, and yet we're doing much more numbers. So the question is why? Could it be that we drink more than them, or economics was not very good? So it could be a factor. Economics could be a factor. Though we know that the impulsivity style of our Guyanese people are very high. So Data, this was covered yesterday, so I won't spend too long with that, but the numbers are coming down and, the data from the Ministry of Health Statistical Unit, I want to give them credit for the hard work they do, coming down to 18.8 from, a figure of one time 24.6. Prior to that, when we were ranked at the number one in the world, was about, I guess, 44. And I want us to look at this slide for a little bit. We're seeing the high rate in our young people, so it is a big cause of concern. As I said, some studies are actually pointing to students, about over 20-something% of our students entertaining thoughts of suicide. And I believe that's a conservative number. I think actually, if we study our students in Guyana, we might find it to be higher. In Guyana, with the 15 to 19 group being very high, it's also very high among our young females. I had a bit of some work done at my hospital. I'm working at 2 private hospitals, so we can actually collect data very properly there and look at the numbers. And we, in the past 4 years that I've been back in Guyana from 2019, we've had persons coming into the hospital as admissions. About 27 persons admitted either to the inpatient or outpatient. And of those numbers, in the past 4 years, we had 2 medical students who were admitted to the intensive care unit for suicide attempt. One was actually extremely serious. We're lucky to have that person alive. And the good news about that person is that gone on to do residency in the United States. So it's good news. You know, I think if we can apply the principle of proper care, we can save people from going on to end their lives later on, because the big risk, as we know, for completion of suicide is a previous attempt. So to know that somebody, as you follow them forward, is doing well is extremely good to hear. This year at Woodland Hospital, which is a private hospital in Guyana, where I work as a consultant, we already had 6 persons admitted as inpatients, of whom 4 were young people. When I talk about young, I'm talking about really young, in the teens and 20s. And these were admissions, and then I had 1 person admitted for outpatient care. And that's a young student who was just recently in my care for trying to end life with drinking a corrosive liquid. Sadly, there was 1 death among the persons admitted, and that was an older person. So he actually met the profile of classical suicides in the older male with a relationship breakup, drinking problems. But it was kind of sad because he had, he drank Ramoxone, which didn't give him very little chance for survival. But as time moved on, he truly wanted to live, So the idea of wanting to die was not anymore in his mind, and he was struggling to live. And he's one of the persons I always will remember, sadly, as we talk about this very sad topic. It's a true fighter, because he with Burnett, he made it 8 days. 8 days, and I thought we would save him, but he eventually succumbed to kidney failure. So, not good news. Here's a bit of data coming from the police, and our police, I want to commend them. They man the suicide hotline. And Vanessa Henry, she was instrumental in giving me this data on what we see in terms of region. This was for the statistical unit, sorry, the one on type of suicides from the police. This is our Department of Statistics at the Ministry of Health. And we are seeing regions, as we know, regions 2, region 3, and region 6 as very high. So these are more of the rural region. I want to acknowledge the presence of persons from the President's Youth Committee, Youth Advisory Committee. Thank you for being here. And I know you all are going to be working a lot in the rural communities because they are isolated. When I hear about that app, I think we need that in Guyana because persons coming from the interior of our country have to travel really far to get access into town. And, most of our programs up here are centralized, so we need to move it out rural. So here again, we see in 2019 a very high number in our rural regions. Methods of suicide in Guyana, I actually thought it was more with poison because we always knew that was the way they went about with impulsivity. But the data from the police is showing that hanging was actually the method used in completion of suicide. And that was figures for 2020 and 2021. Now, you may be wondering why the numbers are not matching because we see different numbers in terms of stats from the Ministry of Health. There's a problem we have in Guyana. I think it's not here alone. When I looked at the study of suicide attempts in medical school, I was sort of looking across the board at medical school reports. Very often, reports are not often given. The cause of death is by suicide. So the doctors will be asked to put a different diagnosis, or sometimes inadvertently, the person who quotes the death, who quoted as a respiratory arrest when the problem was suffocation by strangulation, hanging. So it depends on how it's coded. So we got to get that part of it correct. In terms of the issues that we looked at in causation, and these are some things that we tend to see a lot in Guyana. So I wanted to bring it back for us to look at. We see a lot of these persons who attempt suicide, a reaction to a crisis. One of the persons who died in the intensive care unit last year that I was involved with was a young man who drank Ramoxone. But the most, I don't want to say it's minimize what he felt was so harmful, but his father gave his brother a present that he thought was more valuable than what he got. And he took Ramoxone. And it's like, that is what, maybe we need to educate more about what Ramoxone does to people. I don't think people want to die that way. So it's just an impulsivity that we see with our people, and Dr. Ramsamy has been pushing that campaign to stop that impulsivity, the reaching out to that Ramoxone bottle and drinking it. So we see a lot of loss here going on, loss of finances, loss of self-esteem, which can happen, and stress in schools. We had a young girl from one of the schools commit suicide because she was shamed, or that's the story we heard in the newspapers. I think it was either this year or last year, where she was embarrassed and she went on and committed suicide. So we're seeing this as a problem in our young people. With major depression, of course, people would start to get suicidal as part of their condition, and then they may more plan the suicide. So saving those persons often is very difficult. Substance abuse, of course, very high in our country, Guyana. Alcohol being used by our young people, and again, the controls are not very much there. Young people are drinking in the public eye, and people don't stop it. So there's a lot of work for us to do here. So let me go to what I want to present today, which is a reflection of what was achieved at this medical school, and I believe, we even have one of our graduates from this school in our presence here this afternoon, so it's quite unusual situation. This is a beautiful campus. It's no longer actually a school in Dominica because they moved after Hurricane Maria in 2017 to Barbados. But it's still there. The campus is still there. It's in an island called Dominica. It's a beautiful nature island. I wish I had time to show you the photos of this island. It's absolutely gorgeous. Waterfalls, rivers. It's like a place out of the good book where they talk about the Garden of Eden. I always think of it as that. There's a big campus, about 1,400 students every semester, founded in 1987. And we looked back over 17 years, analyzing data that we kept in the counseling program. And that's one of the programs that was very serious about making a difference to our students. These were students who would leave the USA and come to the Caribbean, and they were putting their care into our hands, their academic care, but also their health care. So there was a health campus, there was a health clinic on campus. We had 3 physicians, 5 counselors, a director of counseling, we had a psychiatrist attached to it. So in actual fact, if you look at that small body in the country, you're getting extremely advanced care. So the numbers that we looked at over the years, while not that many persons, they were concerned because they did attempt. This is not people who just entertain thoughts of self-harm, they actually attempted. And you can see a large group of people in the younger age group, with a fair even balance between males and females. What is quite remarkable is that there's nobody who ended their life in that 70-year period. It's quite remarkable because when I screened out the medical schools, there were students who had actually committed suicide. But in Dominica, and I think it's got to be credit to those people working in the counseling program and the health program for keeping people very safe. As a breakdown in terms of the background of ethnicity, background of the students at the school who attempted, and mostly larger number in the Caucasian, Indian students, Pakistan background, some Jamaican, Afro-American, some Iranians and Middle Eastern, but most of these students actually were American, just their ethnicity was originals were from other countries, but they're almost all students there were American citizens. Most common disorders, major depression. We had a lot of people, fair amount in persistent depressive disorder, what they used to call it dysthymic disorders. There were some students who had psychosis, and most of the persons with psychotic disorders would have been managed by evacuation because they would have been difficult to continue to manage in the school setting. We had substance use problems and acute stress problems in that group. How did they come to the service? We had 42 of them coming in by the counselors. So the counselors would pick up, they were trained to actually ask questions on suicide and ideation. Not to people who they may suspect as having suicidal thoughts or persons with sad feelings, but to everybody. So there was a standard practice. All counselors are trained in suicidal detection and ideation intervention. Then we had the physicians also being trained and managing equally as much as the counseling service was doing. In actual fact, they were integrated, so there was no difference between the two. And that's one of the things that kept the stigma of mental health care low. The numbers that people were, from numbers of people utilizing the counseling service were very high. Friends, there was also a program where students would be educated about picking up signs of suicidal thinking, ideation. And there was also other programs that we could find difficulties in academics, drop in performances and so on. And all students had a academic mentor, so they also had another way of coming in through their mentor. What were the things that the student expressed that saved them from going on to end their life? Having a religious faith. Religious faith seemed very high, and family, worrying about the impact on their family and having a good support system. These were identified as very strong protective factors. Treatment plans, counseling was done, of course, for everybody, medication management. So there are a number of different modalities of care that were employed, including emergency evacuation. So one of the things we had to put in place was getting the evac program up and running. We had a very good evac program that was for what they considered medical problems. But when it came to psychological problems, the evac service didn't want to handle that. They said they weren't going to cover people who did attempted suicide. But we fought the battle, and eventually they made evac program, which was there for the students. The planes would come in, the students would shuttle down by a good medical evac to Miami, and direct flights to Miami. The other thing that I want to emphasize is family involvement was very, very highly utilized. And it really is something that I feel very strongly about, that the family is integral to the protection. They are there with the persons, they have to be there from day one, and involving them was very critical. I heard somebody talk about confidentiality, and I know there's always this concern about confidentiality, but you know, when it comes to a suicide situation, that issue of confidentiality is taking a lesser role, because the protection of the person, we know that is taught, or medical should apply it. So many a time they don't. They may feel, I'm not going to tell your parents what happened because you don't want to. It's a situation of protection. So the family should be involved. And we involved our families. 74% of cases have that involvement. And there are a number of programs put in place, including creating a high risk. So again, some persons may argue that while you are breaching their confidentiality, but this is protection, and these things work. So having them in a high risk, the case files in the medical clinic who are now coded as suicidal attempts, there was an identifier on those case files that any of the doctors would see these persons that follow up. They would also be asking about how they are doing. So follow up was also is a very important process for care. And interestingly, you know, none of those persons that we managed complained. They never voiced the concern that they were, you know, the business was shared outside. Their medical condition was not shared academically. So there's no pain in that sense. There was information given to student services because we needed student services, but there was no impact on the academic performance of their record. So that's the story of how we cared for the students. We had a great emphasis in providing very good counseling programs with 5 full-time counselors who are highly trained. We saw the name of one of them on this presentation. The utilization rates were very high for the service. We also had a safe room or safe place that students who were considered serious attempts were kept on the watch. So until they were safe. And I think one of the big programs that worked very well was the creation of a low stigma for seeking care for a mental health problem. And those were the elements that were very good: family, counselor availability, the clinical care and the safety plans, and following these students all the way to when they qualify, and even referring them to the follow-up counselors in their clinical program in their when they went to Miami, because that's where they started their clinical programs. Everybody went to the Miami semester. So there was a follow-up with those healthcare providers over in the United States. So those were the factors, and I think I can close with that. I want to thank you very much, and any questions that you may have here or from overseas, happy to answer. Or maybe you want to share your thoughts.
So the floor is, thank you so much for that presentation. Really appreciate your thoughts about that and about the differing risk factors, and also the sensitivity that you modeled in dealing with students who are concerned, obviously, about their academic careers and their futures. So thank you for that for that talk. And I'd like to open the floor. And actually, because we have these two, world-class experts in suicidology and suicide prevention, I would invite anybody both to have questions both on either of these talks, but if people have any questions about suicide and its prevention, please feel free to ask our speakers something which I think they would be happy to accommodate questions.
So, Sharma, is there a reason why it shows medical students as the family population? And would you say that coping skills, especially academically, and they're probably not feeling as if they're achieving, but that was one of the key factors they were attempting to try to question coping skills and why did you choose?
So the question from the floor is, from Ms. Cato, is why we choose medical students. Well, I was working there for the past 25 years, so that was the population I was dealing with. A lot of those programs were put in place by our efforts at the university, where we created that program of healthcare wellness. So that was my sample. We're looking back to see how we did. And so we had a positive reflection on our care programs. It's not me, it's about the efforts put in by the university. It was really powerful. And I believe we can use that model right here in Guyana. We have to be more active. We have to be able to follow up. And the second question was about the stressor, the coping skills. I think medical students are very much under tremendous pressure. The academic load is very high. They also are not encouraged to talk through their issues. They sometimes feel that this is part of the paper that was produced, that they feel that if they talk about their own emotional difficulties, mental health problems, it could be held against them. It could go in their records. And these are true things. I mean, there's no doubt that people can be blacklisted, labeled. Often when I present to medical students, both back in Ross University and here at Texas, many of the students will tell me, oh, those people who tend to commit suicide should be banned to become doctors, who are attempting suicide should never become a doctor. How can you trust them? Or if somebody has a bipolar disorder, they should never become a doctor. So the attitudes even among our medical people is not very good. And many a times doctors don't share those thoughts, they just keep it to themselves. So suicide rates in America among our medical student population is very high. Studies have shown that you can actually lose an entire semester of a medical school in 1 year from suicide in the US. That's a US study. So it is a huge problem that is kept somewhat under the radar. It's not talked about. And I think, again, this need to be more open, to be less embarrassed, for sharing and for reflections, for people to be able to talk about what they went through, for persons to come into those schools and talk about what happened. I don't know. I would like to hear from our people here, like what would have happened to at the school where this young girl, you all know about that case, right? Where the girl was shamed, apparently. Well, I don't want to call anything that is not correct, but may have been put under some public pressure and then committed suicide. That's a tragedy. I nearly had one of those just last week where not a young girl from a school drank some poison, but luckily she's doing really good. And then we had another young man who is a student, but going on to college in the US, and he was about to end his life by taking his father gun and shooting himself. And he was admitted. And fortunately, he's doing very well. So the intervention is the protection to actually get there, but then to keep them supported is also very important. So I hope that helps answer your.
Yeah, thank you. Looking at our national statistics, and you looked at 2 areas. And men are more likely to commit suicide than women. What are the major contributing factors make men want to commit suicide. Or rather, succeed in committing suicide, because I look at the ladies, women attempt more.
Yeah, well, worldwide, women will attempt more, 8 times more. But in Guyana, we still see a very high rate among our young women. But the men, the compounding factor for us, I believe, in Guyana is the alcohol that's very much used, abused, and under that influence, the impulsivity becomes stronger, judgment is impaired, so they can act out.
But isn't the stigma around men expressing themselves a contributing factor, which can be higher than abuse of alcohol?
Stigma can be high.
It could be higher than the abuse of alcohol.
Well, yeah, we don't have the exact evidence to say these are the factors, so there could be other factors that. Other factors. You know, the men tend to have this keep their strong feelings inside. So when they explode, they may explode much worse than the ladies, you know. Bottling up feelings is not a good thing.
But strangely enough, our society, the men kill the woman and then they commit suicide.
Yeah.
They have one, they have fighting among them.
There's a particular theory to that. Did you hear that, Professor? That the men in our country tend to kill the partners and then kill themselves. So that's the meninges theory to suicide, you know. Which is truly sad because, you know, the Freudian theory is that they introject the partner into themselves and then commit suicide. So symbolically, they're killing the partner. But the meninges theory seems to be a model here. We see that very often in that regions which are vulnerable, the rural regions in Guyana. And you know, there's like a suicide belt in Guyana which covers region, the Blackbush Polar area, Berbice, and then there's another high area in Essequibo. So there's also I see there was a presentation on the genetics of suicide. So there's some studies that could be done here in our country, looking at that genetic pattern that seems to be very much evident in the family. And we know that the family history of suicide is often the case with people who go on to harm themselves, that there would have been a family history.
Would you say genetic or can I say more environmental? It seems they found suicide, so they will commit suicide.
Well, right. So I'm a believer more in the genetic theory that it is within the genetics of individual. But as you said, you know, the familial influence is very strong. So it's an argument that both sides would win or lose, but they're both very relevant. So looking at the family structure, somebody has committed suicide. But you know, sometimes people hide those suicides from the youngsters and they don't know it. So that might support the genetic theory that they didn't know that there was a great granduncle or somebody who committed suicide. There's an embarrassment in the family that happened. It only comes out when we take the family history and somebody knows, you know, then they said, well, it is true that somebody did it. So.
So like so schools in Guyana, do they have counselors, students to go?
Oh, we have a counselor here. How many counselors are with us? So we have counselors. The thing is, I don't know about the schools. For example, do you all have a counselor? So we have some students here. We had a brave one that got up in school. So you all don't have a?
No.
So I've been hoping we see 4 future counselors now. Yes.
Good day, everyone. If I may, I'm from the Ministry of Education. So we are in the process of adding counselors to school. For some secondary schools throughout the country, we've already had those counselors employed in place. And we're in the process of having the complementary being done. hopefully by the end of the year. So it's a gradual process, but it has started. So some schools do have, and some schools will get in due time. It is a program that will be implemented in all secondary schools throughout the country.
Excellent.
Yeah, so they will have guidance and culture.
Yeah.
So,
So.
Sellers University,
Mhm.
they have, and they're psychologists, so they do have a psychologist.
Yeah, and University of Guyana does have a they have a counseling department, you know. So, we get in there. Thank you very much. Any other good news from the President Youth Committee?
So the psychologist is excellent. What would you say what the student response is to the services that you're offering?
It's not a big response, but students do each other.
But it's a matter of getting them to be comfortable and know that there's no repercussion.
Yeah, and one of the things you gotta tell them is that, a report, the fact that they attended. Because if the school is gonna pay for them, then you have to say, well, this person attended, they are,
Self-report.
coming on their own, there's no report, or if they were sent. By the school,
Mhm.
then you just have to say, the person attended. Satisfactory completed, and they can rejoin their classes or whatever the issue is. But nothing that is very personal there's still confidentiality that covers the engagement.
Very good.
And you keep following up with the student questions.
No, I am not able to follow, the students will follow up. It depends on what the issue is.
Okay.
Because remember, some people don't really, if you text them or call them and they have family or friends that have access to their phone, it may become an issue. So in most times, you have to allow students to contact however they can make that contact.